Caleb Rawlins, a seasoned trail rider, makes a promise to his dying friend Matthew Dorsey, who insists that Caleb marry a woman named Anna Mercer. Matthew, weakened by illness, entrusts Caleb with his final request to care for Anna, who has no one else. Caleb agrees, despite his reservations about marriage. After Matthew's death in a storm, Caleb sets out to fulfill his promise. Along the way, he carries a small package containing a letter and a handkerchief belonging to Anna as he journeys toward Silver Creek, where he plans to find her and honor his word. Despite the weight of the promise and the uncertainty of meeting a woman he has never met, Caleb is determined to follow through, knowing that a man's word is his bond. The wind clawed at the tent walls as though it meant to rip the seams apart. Snow hissed against the canvas in angry bursts, each gust rattling the guy ropes until they groaned like an old barn door in a storm. Inside, lantern light trembled over the patched fabric, throwing thin lines of gold across the damp wool blankets. The air was heavy with the scent of wet leather wood smoke and something sharper fever sweat. Caleb Rawlins sat cross-legged on the frozen ground, his broad shoulders hunched to shield the man on the bedroll from the draft that slipped under the flap. Matthew Dorsey lay there, his skin pale and waxy beneath a dusting of beard. His breathing came in ragged pulls, each one sounding as though it cost him more than the last. Caleb had been on trail drives for most of his 37 years, and he'd seen men hurt before, thrown from a horse, crushed under a steer, nicked by a stray bullet. But this was different. This was the slow, merciless work of illness, hollowing a man from the inside while the wind battered the walls outside. "Caleb," Matthew's voice was barely a scrape in the storm's roar, "when you reach Silver Creek, she'll find you." Caleb leaned closer, pulling the quilt higher over his friend's chest. "Save your strength." Matthew's hand came up with surprising force, gripping Caleb's wrist like a man holding to the last rung of a ladder. "Promise me. Marry her. Don't leave her alone." Caleb's jaw worked. "You know, I've never planned on marrying anyone." "I know," Matthew said, his words catching, "but she's got no one else. She's endured more than you think, and I gave her my word there'd be a home waiting." A blast of wind slammed against the tent, bending the center pole. Caleb looked down at his friend, and in his mind he didn't see the fever-wasted man before him. He saw a gangly boy of 15 who had once plunged into a spring flood to haul him out, both of them shivering and laughing to hide their fear. Matthew had saved his life once, and a debt like that was never truly paid off. "What's her name?" Caleb asked. "Anna Mercer. From Kansas. Can sew a straight seam in a windstorm. Writes honest letters. Works harder than most men I've known. I told her there was a home at the end of the road. That was all Caleb needed. Sometimes a name, a skill, and a promise were enough to bind a man's course." He reached for a tin cup, poured in a little water, warmed by the fire, and held it to Matthew's lips. The cough that followed racked him from head to toe, leaving him bent and gasping. "It was the pass," Caleb said quietly. "You wanted the herd through before the thaw." Matthew tried a faint smile. "Good for the cattle, not for me." When the coughing fit passed, Caleb gathered Matthew's few belongings from beside the bedroll: a nickel watch, a short pencil worn nearly to the nub, a folded letter in tidy script, and a white handkerchief embroidered with an A in blue thread. Caleb smoothed the cloth flat, then wrapped it carefully in brown paper from an old bar of soap, tying it with a scrap of bootlace. His big hands, usually so blunt in their work, moved with surprising gentleness. "I'll see her," he said more to himself than to Matthew. "If she asks for my name beside hers at the church, I'll put it there. If she needs a roof, I'll raise it. If she needs silence, I'll keep it. That's my word." Matthew's breathing eased a faint look of relief, softening his features. "That's enough," he murmured. "She deserves a man who doesn't frighten when the wind changes, a man who keeps his promises when no one's looking." "I don't frighten," Caleb said simply, though inside he felt a knot tightening. The cook pushed through the flap, his eyes red from smoke and cold. "He any better?" he asked, then saw the answer in Caleb's face and removed his hat. They worked in silence, dampening cloths to cool the fevered brow, tucking blankets around chilled hands, the only mercies left to give. Before dawn, Matthew slipped away. The storm still raged, and Caleb sat in the dim light, listening to the canvas shiver around him. He had given his word in a blizzard, and that word would hold. He glanced at the small wrapped handkerchief by the lantern, picturing a woman's hand folding it into her palm, the stitched letter showing like a seal. That was all he knew of Anna Mercer, and it was enough. 3 days later, the weather broke. The herd pushed on under a brittle blue sky, hooves crunching over ice-crusted snow. Caleb rode in silence, the handkerchief in his coat pocket, its weight heavier than any saddlebag. At night, under the sharp stars, he thought about Silver Creek, a town he'd passed through once or twice, and about a woman he had never met, but was now bound to by a promise forged in snow and breathless hours. The land flattened as they neared the valley. Patches of bare earth broke through the white wagon ruts, cutting dark scars through the thawing road. By the time the first chimney smoke curled into sight, Caleb had worked out what he would say when he found her. He would tell Anna Mercer the truth that Matthew Dorsey had died with her name on his lips. He would give her the letter and the handkerchief, and if she asked him to stand beside her at the church, he would. If she wanted nothing more than a safe roof, he'd see it built. A promise was a promise, and Caleb Rawlins had never once broken his word. Somewhere in that town was a woman expecting another man, and she would find Caleb instead. The thought sat in his chest like a stone, but he didn't turn aside. The road into Silver Creek lay straight ahead, and he meant to ride it all the way to the end. 2 weeks after the storm, Silver Creek shimmered under a midday sun that made every step on the main street crunch over dry grit. The smell of horses and baking bread drifted on the breeze, mingling with the clink of hammer on anvil from the blacksmith shop. News had already run its course through the town like wildfire. Caleb Rawlins was coming to meet the fiancée of his late friend, Matthew Dorsey, a woman he had promised to marry. By the time the eastbound stage was due, the townspeople had gathered near Murphy's General Store, drawn as much by curiosity as by any neighborly concern. Mrs. Hanford from the bakery still wore her flour-dusted apron. 2 ranch hands leaned on the hitch-rail hats, low-trading sly grins. A pair of children chased each other near the water trough until their mother shooed them behind her skirt. Caleb stood apart from the knot of onlookers, his hat brim pulled low against the glare boots planted square in the dust. He ignored the weight of their glances, their quiet wagers on what sort of woman might step down from that stage coach. He knew the picture in their minds, thin, pale, desperate enough to cling to any man who would take her in. The distant rumble of hooves grew louder. In a haze of gold dust, the stage rolled into view, drawn by 4 horses with sweat-darkened flanks. Driver Ben Cranford gave the reins a final snap before pulling up in front of the store. The door swung open. First down was a traveling salesman in a wrinkled plaid suit, muttering about the heat. Next came a weary mother clutching a quilt-wrapped baby, stepping quickly aside to keep clear of the wheels. Then a gloved hand gripped the doorframe, followed by the hem of a dark green traveling dress. The woman who stepped into the sunlight was nothing like the whispering crowd had imagined. She was tall, her back straight as a fence post, her gaze sweeping over the faces before her with unhurried precision. Chestnut hair, coiled neatly beneath a modest hat, caught the light like polished wood. A pale scar traced from below her left cheekbone toward her jaw, not enough to mar her beauty, but enough to mark her as someone who had seen trouble and faced it down. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "That must be her," someone whispered. Another voice, half admiring, half wary, said, "Looks like she could stare down a grizzly." Anna Mercer spotted Caleb almost at once, perhaps, from the description Matthew had given her, and crossed the space between them with steady steps. "Mr. Rollins," she said, her voice clear as a creek in spring. Miss Mercer, Caleb answered, touching the brim of his hat. "My condolences for your loss." Her eyes searched his face unreadable, and then she spoke loudly enough for the nearest dozen people to hear. "Before we go any further, I want to be clear. If your promise to Matthew was given out of kindness or pity, I will refuse it here and now." The street went still. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Caleb studied her, noting the lift of her chin and the steady set of her jaw. This was no woman come to beg for shelter. She was measuring him as much as he was measuring her. "You speak your mind," he said finally. "I do," she replied without apology. A ranch hand chuckled under his breath, but Caleb's glance was sharp enough to cut the sound short. "If you're here to judge my sincerity," he said evenly, "then we should speak somewhere less public." "Agreed." She stepped aside, waiting for him to lead. The back room of Murphy's store smelled faintly of kerosene coffee grounds and oiled leather. Dust motes floated in the shaft of light from the high window. Caleb shut the door on the murmuring crowd and turned to face her. "You wanted to speak privately," he said, setting his hat on a crate. "I'm not here for charity, Mr. Rollins," Anna began without hesitation. "Matthew offered me an arrangement built on mutual respect and practical benefit. If you intend to honor his promise, that is what I expect, nothing more, nothing less. Not pity, not ownership." Caleb crossed his arms. "You think I'd treat you as property. I don't know what you'd do," she said evenly. "That's why I'm asking now. If you expect a silent, obedient figure to decorate your home, you should send me back on the next stage. I will not be that woman." "And what would you be?" "A partner," she answered without missing a beat. "One who can work, earn, and stand on her own 2 feet. I'll do my share in any household I'm part of, but I'll keep a measure of independence." Her voice held no bitterness, only conviction. Caleb took in her words, the scar catching the light as she tilted her head slightly. "I was a seamstress in Kansas," she continued. "I had my own shop. It took years to build. Then, one night, a lantern was kicked over during a storm. The fire took everything in minutes. I escaped with this." She touched her cheek and nothing else. "My family had already lost the farm to debt. The shop was all we had left." "And so you agreed to marry Matthew," Caleb said. "We exchanged letters for months. We understood each other. There was no talk of romance, only security, shared responsibility, and the freedom to speak plainly." Caleb nodded slowly. "If we marry, you'll be safe at the ranch. But I'll expect you to live there. This country can be dangerous, and I won't have you in town without reason. And in return, I won't demand anything you're unwilling to give. You'll have food, shelter, and my word on your safety. I'll give you the same respect I'd give any partner I ride alongside." Anna regarded him for a long moment. "And you understand, I will work, and I will keep some of what I earn." "That's your right," Caleb said simply. A faint nod. "Then we are agreed, Mr. Rollins. A practical marriage respects support, and nothing more than either of us wishes to give." The wedding was held the next afternoon in the small clapboard church on the edge of town. A handful of townsfolk attended, most curious, some respectful. Anna wore the same green dress, neat and unadorned. Caleb stood beside her in a clean shirt and black vest hat resting on the pew. When the vows were spoken, promising to honor and keep one another in mutual respect, they answered in steady voices. There was no lingering glance, no romantic flourish, just a firm handshake and signatures in the register. That night at the boarding house, Anna surprised Caleb again. "We'll arrange this sensibly," she said. "You take the bed, I'll make a pallet by the window." He shook his head. "That would be uncomfortable for you. We've both slept rougher. Fair is fair." They set about their separate tasks without fuss, and as she unpacked, Anna asked, "Do you know if Silver Creek needs a seamstress?" By week's end, she'd found an unused side room at Murphy's store. The rent was steep for a new start, but she was determined. What she didn't know, and what Caleb wouldn't tell her, was that he had spoken to Murphy privately, covering half the rent in advance on the condition she never hear of it. "She's proud," he'd said. "Let her think she's paying it all. It'll mean more to her that way." And with that quiet act, their uneasy agreement began to take root. Anna's shop opened on a crisp morning, the pale winter light slanting through the single front window and pooling over bolts of calico spools of thread and a well-worn sewing table positioned so she could see the street. She'd scrubbed the wooden floor until it gleamed sewn curtains for the window and a light muslin that caught the morning sun, and arranged her tools in careful rose scissors, thimbles, needles, and chalk, each within easy reach. The first day was quiet, just a few curious townsfolk stepping inside to look. Mrs. Hanford from the bakery came with a torn apron to mend. A ranch hand brought in a pair of frayed work trousers. Anna worked quickly but neatly her stitches, so even they looked like part of the original cloth. She charged a fair price, no more, no less, and handed each item back with a nod instead of a smile she didn't feel. Within a week, word spread that there was finally a proper seamstress in Silver Creek. Her mornings were spent on repairs and alterations, afternoons on new garments, shirts for the ranchers, Sunday dresses for their wives. The room took on the steady hum of work, the rhythmic snip of scissors, the soft swish of a needle through fabric. Then the girls began to come, 3 at first, young and clumsy with needle and thread, sent by mothers who wanted them to learn a useful skill. Anna sat with them at the work table, correcting a crooked stitch, showing how to knot thread so it wouldn't slip, explaining how to make the fabric work with you, not against you. "You're not just learning to sew," she told them over a stretch of calico. "You're learning how to make sure you never have to depend on someone else for every coin in your pocket." Some paid her in cash, others in eggs, flour, or chopped firewood. Anna never turned away anyone willing to work for their lesson. She also noticed the children who walked past her shop on the way to the schoolhouse, thin coats patched with clumsy stitches, dresses torn and pinned together. One boy's sleeves were so short his wrist showed pale in the cold. That evening she stayed after closing to repair what she could. By morning, the garments hung in the school cloakroom fixed without fanfare. The children never knew who had done it, though their parents might have guessed. Not everyone in town respected her yet. A few whispered about the scarred woman when they thought she couldn't hear. She ignored it, letting her work speak for her. Each garment, finished, each student taught, chipped away at the prejudice. One afternoon, the lesson ended earlier than usual, the girls leaving in a flurry of chatter. Anna locked the door and stepped into the alley to bring in a crate of fabric. That's when she heard it raised voices, a woman's tone sharp with fear. "Go back inside, Miss Mercer," gasped Mrs. Ellen Parsons, her cheek already red and swelling. She was backing away from her whiskey-reeking husband who loomed over her with fists clenched. Anna didn't move. She stepped between them. "That's enough," she said, her voice steady. "You've made your point. Leave her be." The man barked a laugh. "Or what, you'll sew me a lecture." "Or I'll fetch Sheriff Walker," Anna replied, "and the whole town will hear why." Something in her tone made him pause. His shoulders dropped a fraction, and after a tense beat, he muttered a curse and staggered off. Ellen clutched her hands. "You shouldn't have done that. But thank you." "No one should be afraid in their own home," Anna said simply. By evening, the story was moving through town. Some said she'd overstepped. Others, especially the women, admired her for it. Caleb heard it from Murphy before he heard it from her. That night, he stopped by to walk her back to the boarding house. He found her sweeping the shop floor, the lamplight glinting off the silver of her scissors. "You handled Parsons well," he said. It wasn't anything she replied without looking up. It was, he countered, "You kept your rules, and you didn't let him push you." She gathered the scraps into a basket, her movements calm, unhurried. He realized then that her strength wasn't in loud defiance, but in the quiet, unshakable way she refused to bend. 2 weeks later, the test came again. A half-drunk rancher named Clay Dobson stumbled into her shop late on a Saturday, dropping a torn vest on the counter. "Fix it," he said. "I'll pay you next month." Anna slid it back across the counter. "No credit, Mr. Dobson. You know my terms." "Don't be difficult," he said, leaning in with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a bit of mending. You can trust me." "I don't do business on trust alone," she said evenly. "Pay first or take it elsewhere." The room went still. 2 girls in the back froze watching. Dobson's grin faltered under her steady gaze. With a grunt, he snatched the vest and left. By evening, half the town had heard. Some laughed at his embarrassment. Others nodded in approval. For Caleb, it was another mark in her favor, a woman who could stand her ground without theatrics. When he arrived to walk her home that night, she was locking the door. "Dobson won't try that again," he said. Her mouth curved faintly. "No, I don't think he will." They walked in companionable silence toward the boarding house, the crunch of their boots on the frozen dirt the only sound between them. Caleb thought again of Matthew's words that she'd endured more than he could imagine, and found himself wondering just how much of her strength had been forged in fire, and how much had been there all along. By midwinter, Silver Creek was buried under a thick quilt of snow, the kind that dulled every sound except the creak of frozen timber and the occasional ring of a blacksmith's hammer. The ranch hands spent long hours in the barns tending to cattle and breaking ice in the water troughs. Caleb, used to running the place on his own terms, found himself thinking more and more about the woman in town whose shop light still burned after sunset. One Sunday afternoon, while they were both at the boarding house kitchen table, Caleb working over the ranch's grazing records, Anna finishing her shop accounts, she leaned forward and tapped a spot on his hand-drawn map. "You've got unused ground on the north side of your property," she said. "It's flat and sheltered." "Rough pasture," Caleb replied. "Not much good for cattle." "Not for cattle," Anna agreed. "For flax. Flax becomes linen, and linen sells well, especially here where good cloth is scarce. We could spin and weave it locally, cut our dependence on the rail line, avoid delays, and turn a better profit." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Flax takes work. Timing matters." "I know," she said, sliding a folded sheet toward him. "Here's the math seed cost labor yield per acre. Start with 10 acres, and you could see 3 or 4 times your investment in the first year if we find skilled spinners and weavers." Her handwriting was neat, her plan clear and thorough. Caleb studied it for a long moment, his thumb tracing one of the figures. "You've put thought into this. I put thought into everything I mean to succeed at." That was the first time Caleb asked her to sit with him while he worked through the ranch's books. From then on, her voice was part of his decision-making whether to buy feed early before prices rose, which bulls to keep, when to rotate the herd to preserve grazing. She thought in years, not seasons, and Caleb began to wonder how he had managed without her input. One cold evening after closing the shop, Anna started the short walk to the boarding house. The street was quiet except for the glow spilling from the saloon and the soft crunch of her boots on snow. She heard footsteps behind her, uneven and too close. "Evening." Miss Mercer slurred a cattle hand, his breath heavy with whiskey. Or, should I say, Mrs. Rollins. "I'm on my way home," she said, stepping to the side. He shifted into her path. Shame to waste all that behind a counter. Before she could reply, a steady hand landed on the man's shoulder. Caleb stood there, his voice low but carrying weight. "Go home." The man gave a slow grin. "Just talking." I said, "Go home." It wasn't loud, but the steel in Caleb's tone left no room for argument. The cattle hand muttered something under his breath and staggered toward the saloon. Two townsfolk on the boardwalk glanced their way, but Caleb didn't spare them a word. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," Anna said, her breath visible in the cold air. "Thank you." "Walk you home," he said simply. They moved in silence. At the boarding house steps, she studied him. You didn't have to do that so quietly. Most men would have made a scene. Most men, Caleb said, want to prove they can fight more than they want to stop trouble. I'm interested in stopping trouble. Anna's mouth curved just slightly. "You're a careful man, Caleb Rollins. Careful keeps people safe. Good night, Anna." That night, lying in bed, she thought about the way he'd appeared without warning, how he hadn't claimed her in front of anyone, just made sure she was safe. It was the kind of protection that didn't ask for credit and didn't expect anything in return. The days shortened, the snow deepened, and the fire in the shop stove burned almost constantly. Caleb's trips to town became more frequent, sometimes on business, sometimes with no reason he could name. It was on one of those days, a gray morning with fine snow drifting down, that he stopped outside her shop window. Inside, Anna was kneeling beside a boy no older than 8, his coat patched and boots too big. She was wrapping bright scraps of fabric around a small carved horse, tying the bundle neatly with twine. Her hands moved with the same precision she used on her sewing, but her face was softer, warmer, as if her steadiness could shield the boy from the cold beyond the door. Caleb lingered until the boy grinned shyly and darted out into the snow. Anna straightened, brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, and for a moment looked toward the window. Whether she saw him or not, he couldn't tell, but something in his chest pulled tight. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled. "You're out early for a day like this," she said. "Bank meeting," he replied, stamping the snow from his boots. "About the Morrison land north of my fence. Good ground. You're thinking of buying it." "I was," he admitted, then paused. "But that's not the only reason I came." Her brows lifted slightly. "No." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Anna, this isn't about a promise anymore. Hasn't been for a while. Somewhere along the way, you became the person I look for, first in the morning and last at night. You've built something here at the shop on the ranch in this town that I can't imagine without. I want that with you. I want you." The hiss of snow against the window filled the silence between them. "You have a strange sense of timing," she said softly. "I've been in love with you for weeks, but I told myself to keep it quiet. We had an agreement." "I remember," he said, smiling faintly. "Respect, support, nothing more than we wish to give. I'm wishing for more now." She laughed once, shaking her head. "So am I." When he reached for her, she stepped into his arms without hesitation. The kiss they shared was unhurried and warm, carrying none of their old reserve. Outside, snow swirled thick as curtains, but inside the world narrowed to breath and certainty. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "So, what about the Morrison land?" she asked. "We'll buy it if you think it's a good move." "I do," she said. "We'll make it pay for itself in 3 years." They left the shop together, walking through the muffled quiet of falling snow, bound now by something far stronger than the promise that had first brought them together. The rest of that winter seemed to pass in a steady rhythm of work planning and quiet moments that no longer felt guarded. At the ranch house, the big kitchen table became their command post. Ledgers and maps spread across its scarred surface coffee cups, cooling between their elbows as they worked through the future, one decision at a time. Caleb pointed to a square of pasture on the Morrison land they now owned. "We can run more cattle here, rotate them sooner so the grass recovers faster." Anna leaned over, pencil in hand. "The north edge is perfect for flax. We could train some of the ranch hands' wives to help with harvest, then weave the linen right here. It'll give them income during the slow months and save us from depending on the rail." "It's settled, then," he said. "We'll build it together." In town, Anna's shop had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a place to mend clothes. Every Thursday afternoon, the sewing tables filled with women, 2 widows, a rancher's daughter, Mrs. Parsons, from the alley, and eventually others who came with their children in tow. The air hummed with chatter, the scent of tea drifting from the pot on the stove. Needles clicked against fabric as stories passed back and forth along with quiet advice. "It's not just about clothes," Anna told Caleb one evening. "It's about giving them something that's theirs, something no one can take away." Caleb, who'd never thought much about a needle beyond patching his own shirts, was proud of what she was building. He had seen the shift in the town's eyes, how the woman they once whispered about as the scarred newcomer was now spoken of with respect. One night, after supper, the fire burning low in the hearth, Caleb set his coffee aside. "You know," he said slowly, "maybe Matthew knew exactly what he was doing when he asked me to marry you." Anna tilted her head. "You think so? That man never made a move without a reason. I think he saw we'd be good for each other before we saw it ourselves." She gazed into the flames for a moment, then smiled softly. "If that's true, I'll be grateful to him for the rest of my life." Caleb reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "So will I." Later that night, long after they'd banked the fire and the house had gone quiet, Caleb stood in the dim light of their bedroom. Anna slept peacefully, the curve of her cheek touched by the faint glow from the hearth in the other room. On the small shelf by the window sat a plain wooden box. He opened it and took out the white handkerchief, the one with the blue-stitched A in the corner. The cloth was still clean, the stitches still neat. He held it for a long moment, the memory of that snowbound tent and Matthew's voice as sharp as if it had been yesterday. Without a word, he set the folded handkerchief on the table beside her where she'd see it in the morning. It wasn't for thanks or explanation. It was a promise kept and a quiet acknowledgement of the man who had set them on this path. Outside, snow fell in soft sheets over the darkened pastures. Inside, the fire's warmth wrapped around them both. Caleb climbed into bed beside her, knowing that what had begun as duty had become the truest gift of his life. And so, the promise made in a bitter storm had transformed into something far greater. A partnership forged through respect, strengthened by shared work, and deepened by love neither of them had expected, but both had been searching for. Sometimes the commitments we make in life begin as obligations. We take them on because honor demands it, because loyalty to a friend leaves us no choice. But life has a way of reshaping those promises, turning them into something richer than we imagined. Caleb and Anna began with nothing more than duty holding them together, yet through patience, hard work, and the willingness to stand side by side, they built a home and a life worth keeping. In your own life, you may find that the promises you make in difficult times lead you to unexpected blessings. Don't shy away from the work those promises require. They might just bring you the people and the purpose you've been missing. If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time when keeping your word changed your life in ways you never expected. And if you'd like more tales of grit, resilience, and love forged in unlikely places, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Out here in the wide open spaces, love always finds its way.